Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to the Jason Wright Show. So, we had ourselves a presidential election. And as a result, I'm going to do something that I rarely do on the show, which is talk about politics. Sort of. There is a crisis in America when it comes to males, and in particular, young men. And I think that there was an incredible exhibit of this in the 2024 election. And there's a whole lot of things I could talk about that I'm going to set aside because I don't want to get into a lot of the ideology or anything like that. And I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of you will disagree with the points that are going to be made on today's show. Um, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to leave it to someone who, frankly, is brighter, smarter, older, wiser than I am. It's a guy named Scott Galloway, and I've mentioned Scott on the podcast before. Scott Galloway is a professor at NYU, and for those of you who are on the left and you listen to the show, I want to tell you right now, if you don't know who Scott Galloway is, he is not a conservative. He is absolutely not a conservative. Scott is what I would call what's kind of being defined these days as an old school liberal. Think of Bill Maher. He's on Bill Maher's show a lot. He's much like Bill. There are some things that Scott says that really frustrate me to no end. There are a lot of things he says that make me think he's one of the smartest guys on the planet. I think that's one of the things that's most interesting about him. I discovered him in 2024. I actually had purchased one of his books on different statistics and throughout the course of America and some things that are changing. I guess I bought it early in the year, or maybe it was late last year. Doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm babbling on about that. But the simple fact is, I had heard a little bit about Scott Galloway in passing, but it wasn't until this year that he really came onto my radar, and that came through the his one of his most recent books, The Algebra of Happiness, which I've talked about on the show before. And I really liked him. I started following him on X and then following his podcast. But then the election came along, and he was such an anti-Trump guy that, and he just kept posting about it. And it was like, I didn't want to, I was not going to Scott Galloway for politics. That's not, I mean, he's a successful entrepreneur. He talks a lot about the markets. He talks a lot about business. He talks about business strategy. He talks about leadership. He has a heart for men. He's one of the few people at his level with his broad of an audience that talks about this huge problem we have of young men being left behind. He also talks about how the older, wealthier generations are robbing from the younger generations. He has a real heart for the people that he teaches, the young adults that he teaches at NYU, and seeing that they're struggling so hard to buy homes, to build wealth when they get out. He just really has a heart for this, and he wants to restructure some things that make sense, some things that absolutely do not. But all in all, he's got a lot of wisdom to offer. And as I was ciphering through the ashes of the election, getting all the post-election commentary, I came across a conversation that he had with Stephen Bartlett, the host of Diary of a CEO, fantastic podcast I highly recommend. And this was actually before the election. And they were discussing why so many men were migrating toward Trump. And this is what Scott Galloway had to say about it. And I think it perfectly encapsulates why so many men of all stripes, Hispanics, blacks, whites, you name it, men trended toward Trump, thus the Republican Party. Why is that? Well, here's Scott Galloway's explanation.
Why are men choosing Trump?
So this is an unusual election in the sense that neither of these candidates, based on their metrics, has ever been elected before. We've never had since maybe Roosevelt. Was it Roosevelt or Truman, actually? Have we had an incumbent party be reelected when they have less than a 50% approval? So if Harris gets elected, it's almost a first-time occurrence that an incumbent administration this unpopular gets reelected. Trump never cracked 50% approval. No presidential candidate who has never been above 50% has ever been reelected. So whoever wins, it's an unprecedented election of someone who typically does not get reelected. In terms of men, what you've seen is young men are going more conservative, young women are going slightly more progressive. And that has a lot of unfortunate ramifications because, again, it's another reason why young people are not getting together and mating. It's yet another reason not to date somebody. When I was your age, I was thinking about this when I was dating. For the life of me, if I went through every person I've dated in my 20s and 30s, I don't remember what their political affiliation was. I didn't care. We didn't talk about that. It was like, are you fun? I'm fun. Are you attracted to me? I'm not, like, let's go out, let's drink, let's see where this goes. We didn't talk about politics. So it's a shame because now politics is now kind of a gender divide. So it's having social ramifications. I would argue that young men are not going to the Republican Party. They're actually less conservative, or people have this image of young men that their knuckles are dragging along the ground. They actually are almost as in favor of gender rights as young women. What I would argue is that they're leaving the Democratic Party because if you go to the DNC, the Democratic Party's website, there's a section that says who we serve. Click on it. And it says, these are the constituents in America that we serve, that we advocate for. And it lists 16 demographic groups ranging from Asians and Pacific Islanders, the disabled, seniors, Black Americans, veterans. It goes through all of these groups. And I tried to add it up, and I think it adds up to 76% of the US population. But similar to kind of the DEI apparatus on campus now, or on university campuses, when you're purposely advocating and trying to advantage 76% of the population, you're not advantaging 76% of the population or advocating for them. You're discriminating against the 24%. And that 24% are squarely one group. It's young men. And if you look at the Democratic National Convention, it was a parade of demographic groups, but not one mentioned the group that has fallen furthest, fastest in the United States, and that's young men. Families and young men feel this, right? We don't have an opioid or a homeless crisis in the United States. We have a male opioid and a male homeless crisis. 3 out of 4 opioid addicts, 3 out of 4 homeless people are men, right? 3 times as likely to kill themselves, 12 times as likely to be incarcerated. Women under the age of 30 are now making more money than men. More single women own homes than single men. And by the way, we should never do anything to get in the way of that. That's a remarkable victory for us. But a lot of young men and their families feel that these young men are really struggling, and they are not seen by the Democratic Party. Because the Democratic Party, I would argue that our big failure over the last 20 years is that we've become sort of these self-appointed cops of social justice and have tried to lecture the nation on what is the right social policy or behaviors, and that America has pretty squarely rejected this. The example I use is the University of Michigan, an amazing university, has invested $150 million in DEI, social policy, and the number of complaints about racism is up 30-fold. The sentiment, the feeling about America has all gone down. And so the Democrats have decided we're about social policy as opposed to the economic policies that are actually going to impact you. And a large part of America has sort of rejected it. Young men do not feel seen by the Democratic Party. And it's not only just young men, but it's their families. So I would argue it's not so much they're moving to the Republican Party as they're moving away from the Democratic Party. But there's just to use this overused term, young men do not feel seen by the Democratic Party. It's like you're fighting for everyone except for me. And let's be honest, my group is not doing well. The group that has ascended the fastest globally is women. Twice as many women in the last 30 years elected to some form of parliament. More women globally now are seeking tertiary education than men. By the way, again, a huge victory for all of us. Fantastic. But there's this analogy that Chris Williams, the podcast that kind of reminds me a little bit of you, uses, and he calls it the high heels effect. And that is 50% of women say they won't date someone who's shorter than them. I bet it's more like 80%. It's just an embarrassing thing to say. And it's very instinctual because women at some point are more vulnerable because of pregnancy and raising kids. And they want someone who instinctively they feel could physically protect them. So they tend to be not attracted to a man shorter than them. Metaphorically, women are getting taller and taller each year, making more money, more college attendance. They're just killing it. More and more people elected to positions of power and influence. Men are getting shorter and shorter. So in sum, we talked about this, women mate socioeconomically horizontally and up, men horizontally and down. The pool of horizontal and up among men is smaller. And when men don't have the prospect of a romantic relationship, they come off the rails. Women oftentimes will reinvest that energy in friendships and work. Men reinvest that energy in vaping and video games and porn. I mean, men without the prospect of a romantic relationship, I mean, look at the most violent, unstable places in the world. They all have a preponderance of things, and that is a bunch of men with very little economic or romantic opportunities. And so you have a cohort of not only young men, but families that are upset and angry about this cohort, maybe unfairly expectant around what they should expect from the American economy, but they're not doing well. And they feel seen by the Republican Party and Trump, who are pushing back on many of these social policies, that the snake is eating its own tail, that it's gone so far to the progressive that at the end of the day, it's no longer promoting the rights of non-whites, for example. 60 years ago, 12 Black people at Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, that's a problem. 2/3 of Harvard's freshman class now identifies as non-white. And somehow, as a non-white male that's not making as much money, that's more inclined to be an addict or gambling, that owns fewer homes, somehow I'm still the enemy. I'm still like, I've been told by media that I'm kind of should have collective guilt because of the privilege my dad and my granddad received. So there's I think, justifiable anger and a feeling that the Democratic Party has really moved away from young men.
Well said, Scott Galloway. All right, next. So Constantine Kisan is the host of and he's, by the way, again, the two videos, the two clips I'm showing you today are not from conservatives. It wasn't necessarily purposeful in that regard. It's just there's a shift happening right now in America. And I think it's important to get away from this idea of just there's the uber right and the uber left, and there's the voices are coalescing in the middle, and the middle is just simply looking more conservative. That's all there is to it. Like Constantine Kisan, who's one of the co-hosts of the Trigonometry podcast, fantastic podcast. Again, I suggest everyone listen to it. And he's become one of my favorite thinkers and commentators on what's going on, in particularly what's going on in Western civilization. Now, for those of you who don't know who Constantine Kisan is, he is a first-generation immigrant in the UK from the former Soviet Union. His parents literally lived through communism, so he's got a unique take on this. He's also very pro-American, pro-Western civilization because he sees it from a more he understands the alternative far better than a lot of the college kids marching in the streets to free Palestine in New York City, who come from families with homes in the Hamptons and are on the West Coast from Beverly Hills and have no understanding of the beauty and miracle that is Western civilization as we know it. And so Constantine, he did one of his monologues, which again are incredible. He did a monologue to, I think he was addressing it kind of to his fellow Brits as to here's what you don't understand about Americans. And he gave some points about here is who the American people are and how they think. And I think he nailed it superbly. So let's take a listen to that.
This video is for my British and European friends who are shocked, surprised, and horrified at Donald Trump's landslide victory. Here are 10 reasons you didn't see it coming. By the way, once you've watched this video, make sure you look in the comments and see what Americans are saying about whether this video makes sense or not. Here are the 10 reasons. 1. Americans love their country and want it to be the best country in the world. America is a nation of people who conquered a continent. They love strength. They love winning. Any leader who appeals to that has an automatic advantage. 2. Unlike Europeans, Americans have not accepted managed decline. They don't have net zero here. They believe in producing their own energy and making it as cheap as possible because they know that their prosperity depends on it. 3. Prices for most basic goods in the US have increased rapidly and are sky high. What the official statistics say about inflation and the reality of people's lives are not the same. 4. Unlike you, Americans do not believe in socialism. They believe in meritocracy. They don't care about the super rich being super rich because they know that they live in a country where being super rich is available to anyone with the talent and drive to make it. They don't resent success. They celebrate it. 5. Americans are the most pro-immigration people in the world. Yes, they're the most pro-immigration people in the world. Americans love an immigrant success story. They want more talented immigrants to come to America. But they refuse to accept people coming here illegally. They believe in having a border. 6. Americans are sensitive about racial issues and their country's imperfect history. They believe that those who are disadvantaged by the circumstances of their birth should be given the opportunity to succeed. What they reject, however, is the idea that in order to address the errors of the past, new errors must be made. DEI is racist. They know it and they reject it precisely because they're not racist. 7. Americans are the most philo-Semitic nation on earth. October 7th and the pro-Hamas left's reactions shocked them to their very core because, among other things, they remember what 9/11 was like and they know jihad when they see it. 8. Americans are extremely practical people. They care about what works, not what sounds good. In Europe, we produce great writers and intellectuals. In America, they produce and attract great engineers, businessmen, and investors. Because of this, they care less about Trump's rhetoric than you do and more about his policies than you do. 9. Americans are deeply optimistic people. They hate negativity. The woke view of American history as a series of evils for which they must eternally apologize is utterly abhorrent to them. They believe in moving forward together, not endlessly obsessing about the past. And 10. America is a country whose founding story is one of resistance to government overreach. They loathe unnecessary restrictions, regulations, and control. They understand that freedom comes with a price, and that price is self-reliance. They pay it gladly.
So I thought I would take Constantine's recommendation and actually read some of the comments that were in some of the over 4,000 comments on this video. Here's the first one. Hispanic woman from Maryland married to an Asian American man. This list is spot on. I am fiercely proud of my country and its promises of freedom and prosperity. I grew up poor, attended college and graduate school, and feel profoundly grateful for the opportunities I've been afforded. The founding of America was not some racist project. Our founding fathers may have failed at times to live up to their lofty ideals, but they endowed us with tremendous freedoms. I grew up a dark-skinned girl, splitting my time between New England and the South. American woman here, absolutely dead on, Constantine. Was kind of nice to hear it all enumerated. Thanks. And then this is probably my favorite one. This should be directed at the American media. So as is the case with all these elections, we had the host of celebrities saying they're leaving the country, they're out, they're going. And it reminded me, every time I hear celebrities are going to leave the country if the person that they want to become president doesn't get elected, I'm reminded of this thing I went to years and years ago. I went to listen to Zig Ziglar speak. And we get there and it's at AT&T Stadium, it's packed, and all of a sudden this Indian guy gets out there and he's got a real thick Indian accent and he's talking about how he's with the Zig Ziglar organization. And I'll be honest with you, the first thing I thought was, oh man, Zig's not going to be here. I'm going to listen to this guy. He's the substitute. First of all, I can barely understand him. And frankly, I came to see Zig Ziglar. This guy goes on to give a speech about how he was a first-generation immigrant from India. And he started out as a telemarketer in the Zig Ziglar organization. And he had the goal of becoming the Zig Ziglar International Ambassador. And that day on that stage, he was the Zig Ziglar International Ambassador. And I remember he said something that has never escaped me. He gave this profound speech, very pro-American, very pro-immigrant. It was the immigrant story that we love, that Constantine points to. He said, Americans love a good immigrant story. We do. We love it. And this guy that I was listening to, he was that story. I'll never forget, he ended his speech with this. If you can't make it in America, don't leave. And that's so very true. If you can't make it here, there is nowhere to turn. I had people asking me during this election, if you were going to move somewhere else, where would you go? I said rural America. If I weren't going to live where I currently live, which is in more of a suburban area, you take the entire globe as far as property rights, rule of law, freedom, liberty, opportunity for entrepreneurship, the potential for things to get better no matter how dark they get. America's the last best hope on earth. I believe that regardless of who gets elected president. I did a video before the election basically stating that no matter what I did, no matter who won the election, I would wake up the next day and do the exact same thing I did the day before. Because as long as I was waking up in America, I knew there was the hope of a brighter day. Now, that could all come to an end. We have politicians and we have forces in this country right now that despise everything this country stands on. But I can tell you this. We are, in my opinion, still that city on a hill, shining bright. And look, bottom line is, if you can't make it here, don't leave. I'm Jason. I'm out. Well, that does it for this episode of The Jason Wright Show. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a Texas Titan Media production. Fourth Wall did the music. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Please consider going out to jasonwrightnow.com and signing up for the Vitruvian letter. Also, please go out to iTunes. It takes like 30 seconds to just leave us a 5-star rating. It does wonders for the podcast. I would be so grateful. And with that, until we meet again, go crush it and endeavor to improve always in all ways. I'm out.